بالله زرت المغاني مرة عرج على أهلي هناك وسلمي.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Everyone is very tired. I can see that. Firstly, I'd like to just thank everyone for coming here, especially Al-Aqsa Friends Society for inviting me here to give this talk. This is going to be a very heavy subject for this evening, especially given that you're having your midterms at the moment. And as I'm familiar with much of Muslim culture on this side of the world, this is not one of your favorite subjects to talk about. Had it been about marriage, I'm sure this whole place would have been full by now. Or maybe about jinn or something of that sort. Which is why I'm grateful to Al-Aqsa Friends Society, because they are actually bringing up the issues that are most important to this ummah in the contemporary period. There's only so many lectures you can have on marriage to realize that that's not our problem. And that's not to say that these subjects aren't important, but our ummah should be about being balanced. It should be about addressing every issue. That's what Islam is about. And when we focus on domestic issues only, we have a serious problem. Either in the sense that we lack the intellectual clout to deal with it, or it's too controversial. Recently, I put up a post on my Facebook regarding adab, and how many people misconceive what this aspect of our religion is. And many people find it to be simply about our mannerisms and simply about how not to have conflict with others. However, it's more than that. It's about behaving in a way that we bring justice to everything in our lives. We bring justice and balance to everything in our lives and every obstacle that we face. And in that regard, when we face with issues such as terrorism and extremism in the contemporary period, this is something that we should be firmly geared towards resolving to the best of our abilities, not only as a community, but as intellectuals, as brothers and sisters of the same faith. So I'd like to thank you once again for bringing this controversial topic to the stage and for possibly putting a target on my back, which is fun. Now, before we get into the subject any further, just a minor disclaimer. As brother had suggested or stated about me earlier, my degrees are in philosophy. So I've actually studied Western philosophy for about 6 years of my life. I'm very tired, as you can see. I then studied Islamic philosophy, and now I decided to do something more practical with my life and apply my analytical thinking skills to a more extreme subject, as you can see. And my thesis is on ISIS, so I will be discussing them at length as well throughout this lecture. I hear there may be some supporters in the university, so if you wish to kill me, please do so afterwards so that I can finish my talk. That'd be greatly appreciated. I'd also like to thank my parents and my wife for allowing me to give this talk, given the safety concerns involved, and for still encouraging me to talk about these important issues. So I believe I've wasted 5 minutes of my time enough. And let's jump straight into the conversation. All right then. Now, I promise that I won't be too boring because the subject is not exactly fun. It can be a little bit dreary. However, there's a lot of information that's to be had here, and I think a lot of things that have not been told to you because Western media, in general, tends to frame the subject in such a way that we cannot fully understand why Muslims will go out and kill themselves or kill innocent people. We honestly still don't have the answers as to why, because the Western notion of terrorism is so corrupt that it disallows us from actually understanding what's going on. And I hope to, in this lecture, to elucidate or to explain what the actual factors are behind this violence and what Islam has to say about it. All right, so the definition of terrorism needs to be explained first before going any further. And the general definition that has been accepted by most academics is the following: the unlawful use of force and violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives. Basically, force or coercion against a civilian population, primarily, or government unlawfully, without being provoked, for the purpose of gaining some sort of political or social goal or gain. This definition, however, is disputed, as the West itself is the one who has defined it. And if we look at the history of Western warfare, this definition has often been violated on numerous occasions, such as the bombings of Dresden during World War II, when the Allied powers had carpet-bombed German cities of civilians trying to force them to oppose Hitler, killing thousands and thousands of innocent men, women, and children. However, that was never recorded as a war crime. The bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima that killed over 300,000 people in the immediate blast, and then 50 years of constant radiation damage to the local population, killing another 100,000 or more. That is not talked about as a war crime. I'm sure the Japanese feel otherwise. Even recently in Iraq, during the Iraq invasion, the second one, George Bush Jr. sent his forces in and attacked the city of Fallujah using uranium-tipped bullets. To this day, it is considered a more horrible offense than even the aftermath of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. More mutations to this day are still damaging the population of those children. But the West doesn't call it terrorism. And there's a reason for that, which we will get into in the near future. So I propose that this definition is not a universal one. Rather, the proper definition of terrorism from the Western perspective is this: the unlawful use of force and violence by Muslims against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives. Did anyone catch the addition that I made? The unlawful use of force and violence by Muslims. Now, this may seem a little unfair, a little bit straw-manning my opposition, but we will see soon enough that this is actually the case, and this is actually how policies are constructed in the West in regards to terrorism and violence. Prior to that, however, I think that it would be appropriate to discuss what Islam's position is on terrorism and what it defines as terrorism from our tradition. So, terrorism is often associated with jihad in the media. However, jihad, from the Islamic perspective, as we are all fairly aware of, is simply to struggle or to strive against obstacles that prevent us from getting closer to Allah or deprive us of our general well-being. This would be, I think, an appropriate definition for the concept of jihad that also covers not only the external struggles that we deal with on a daily basis, not even the extremes such as warfare, but also the inner struggles, the various and often spiritual battles that we face in order to come closer to Allah on a daily basis. However, jihad has been misconstrued as simply being a physical conflict. But from our tradition, jihad in the physical sense is actually the least considered. It is the least practiced in our religion. In fact, another form of jihad is considered much higher. And no, I'm not going to give the opinion that the inner jihad is the greater jihad. In fact, this is based on a weak hadith, weak narration. Though that it is valid to some extent, that is actually not the greater jihad, according to our sources. The Quran elucidates to give us a clue as to what the greater jihad actually is. In Surah 25:52, the Quran states, "Obey not the unbelievers and the hypocrites, and strive against them in a mighty way, in a great way, with the Quran." With the Quran. Now, unless you think you're going to be throwing the Quran at people, then I don't think it doesn't mean physical, okay? It means obviously in oral fashion, all right? Complementing this, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, the best jihad, the superlative here, is to say a word of truth before a tyrant. The best jihad is to say a word of truth before a tyrant. Today we have many people saying that the only way you can become or you can join the jihad is by making hijrah over to a war zone and fighting. But the Prophet ﷺ was already practicing jihad the moment he began his mission. According to this narration, he was already practicing jihad the moment he opened his mouth to express the revelation to his community. He was a mujahid way before the Battle of Badr. And this is further exemplified by the fact that Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah said, jihad with decisive proof and the tongue takes precedence over jihad with the sword and the spear. Once again, jihad with decisive proof and the tongue takes precedence. Precedence meaning what? It is above, it is first, exemplary. Over jihad with the sword and the spear. This is also further evidenced by the first martyr in Islam, Umayyah, may Allah pleased with her. How did she pass away? Did she pick up a spear and a sword and march into battle, and then she was declared a martyr? She was persecuted for what she spoke, and she was killed on account of that. She became a martyr for the jihad that came from here, not from her sword, not from her spear. And she was the first among all of us. And unfortunately, we have sort of downgraded this understanding of jihad. We have given into the misconceptions that jihad is simply about physical warfare, especially in regards to how we do da'wah. You hear many da'is today, and I'm not going to name anyone, but you hear many da'is today who say that we should not argue with people, we should not debate with people, we should always be softly spoken, we should always be nice to them, we should always, kumbaya, and, sitting there and eating popcorn and marshmallows. I don't know if you like the combination, I happen to. Right? But this is not the case, actually. This is not the case. While the Prophet ﷺ did give us guidance, etiquettes to follow when we do debating and when we engage with the enemy, as you may call them. Okay. Of course, we're not supposed to be vulgar, but he did not say, and the Quran especially did not say, that you should be so tolerant that you're not controversial, that you're not confronting of the kuffar. So, for instance, in the Quran, Surah 29:46, and do not argue with the people of the book except in a way that is best, except for those who commit injustice among them. Except for those who commit injustice among them. This only counts for those who are not committing injustice. You speak in the best manner to them, you are not harsh with them. But if they are somebody who is committing fitna, like beyond, this does not apply. Another place, the Quran 66:9 states, O Prophet ﷺ, Strive against the disbelievers and the hypocrites and be harsh with them. Hell will be their home. Be harsh with them. Once again, this does not mean vulgarness. It doesn't mean that we go around insulting. But it also doesn't mean that we give in to their demands. We do not give in to their standards. We combat them sternly. We try to establish truth as strongly as we possibly can. And we do not give up. And for most of the Prophet's life, this was the form of jihad that he practiced. And in fact, he actually went to very few battles. Many of you are aware of this. He rarely fought, actually. Compared to how much he spoke, how much he debated with the kuffar, he rarely went to battle. Rarely. And yet we have so many Muslims these days claiming that somehow this was the brunt of his mission. This was somehow how Islam was spread, primarily. We actually have individuals who are saying this. Now, I'm not saying that Islam is also just peace, because that's also false. Islam is not peace. Islam is not war. Islam is submission. Islam is balance. Islam calls to wasatiyah. It doesn't call to pacifism. It doesn't call to all-out war. But for some reason, the Muslims in this day and age, we take two extremes. We either say, no, it's all peaceful, and doves and bunnies and everything else. And then you have another group that says, no, it's all bloodshed and death and destruction. All of these are wrong. Because in this day and age, it's hard to be balanced. It's easier to be lazy and just picnic school. Much easier. So what about jihad of the sword? Not only is this the least practiced, but there are so many limitations to it that to even claim that it's comparable to modern warfare is an insult, not only to the teachings itself, but even to basic intellect in regards to how modern warfare is practiced. The Quran once again says, 2:190, fight in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those who fight you but do not transgress the limits. Indeed, Allah does not like transgressors. What are these limits? There are many. Do not kill non-combatants, primarily men, women, children who are not in warfare. Do not kill the elderly. Do not kill the disabled. Do not kill monks. Do not kill anyone that is not a threat to you. Do not chop down a tree. Do not kill animals for no reason. Do not steal. Do not cause economic disharmony by putting sanctions on other governments and killing 500,000 children like you did in Iraq. Do not starve the populations. Do not drain them of their water supply. Do not pollute them. There are so many conditions here, it would almost seem impossible from the modern mindset that you could win a war. Because you can't break any of these rules. Do not consume the enemy with fire. And yet we drop bombs on everyone. It's interesting how today we don't have much of a discussion on the use of certain weapons. How many scholars have discussed the use of bombs? I'm not talking about suicide bombs, I'm talking about dropping from hundreds of feet in the air. Has anybody ever discussed, there have been discussions by the way, very rarely. How many people have discussed this form of warfare? Do you know that over 80% of casualties in modern warfare in the past 100 years have been civilians? Over 80% of all deaths from war are civilians. Why? Because of our technology. There is no such thing as a precision bomb. The moment a bomb drops to kill its target, it's going to kill 100 times more people around that person who have nothing to do with it. This is expected, and this is the standard of modern warfare. Where are our scholars saying bombs should not even be allowed to begin with? Now, of course, we have instances in war where mortars were used and such, but they did not explode upon impact. They broke down walls, they may have crushed some people, but they did not explode and send shards and shrapnel hundreds of feet into the air, killing men, women, and children in nearby buildings. Have we discussed these weapons? Why do all Muslim nations have this technology? When they know it's going to kill more civilians than it's going to kill soldiers. Collateral damage even is not really a concept in Islam. We have it, but for very extreme situations. And I mean extreme, as in they never happen. For instance, if you know that there is a building with a group of soldiers, and there are more civilians or equal amount to those soldiers within that building, you are not allowed to hit it. That is it. There is no collateral damage in that sense. Okay, you are not allowed to target that building to kill those people. You either take the damage from those soldiers, or you find another way to attack them, but you will not kill those people inside. That is a rule of thumb for us. This is not debatable. Of course, there are different opinions to be had, but they will never go to the extreme that some of the modern so-called mujahideen going around killing people. It doesn't go to that extreme of those opinions. So in Islam, terrorism would probably be best understood as hiraba, and terrorists as muharibun. And we understand this from one place in the Quran, Surah Ma'idah, 532 through 34, and I'm going to read the entire surah. I need you to understand the context here. We ordained for the children of Israel that if anyone killed a person not in retaliation of murder or in to spread mischief in the land, it would be as if he killed all of mankind, and if anyone saved a life, it would be as if he saved all of mankind. And indeed, there came to them our messengers with clear proofs, evidences, and signs. However, even after that, many of them continued to exceed the limits by doing oppression unjustly and exceeding beyond the limits set by Allah, such as major sins, in the land. Indeed, the penalty for those who wage war against Allah and His Messenger, they are connected. If you commit corruption, you are waging war against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. And strive upon us to cause corruption is none but that they be killed or crucified, or that their hands and feet be cut off from opposite sides, or that they be exiled from the land. That is for them a disgrace in this world, and for them in the hereafter is a great punishment, except for those who return repenting before you apprehend them. And know that Allah is forgiving and merciful. Now, in regards to hiraba, people, a lot of the classical scholars will state that this only refers to briganding, basically people who wait on the side of the road and they kill incoming traders and steal their property and their money. Okay. However, it has been extended throughout time as new situations were revealed. So, for instance, the Zahiri Ibn Hazm Al-Andalusi, once again, another disclaimer here, I'll be using Andalusian scholars not because I'm a nationalist or anything, but because I study primarily Maliki fiqh, and most of their scholars in history are from Andalus. So if I mention a lot of Andalusians, it's not because I'm Andalusian, it's just because that happens to be the case. So, anyways, Ibn Hazm states, one who puts people in fear on the road, whether or not with a weapon, at night or day, in urban areas or in open spaces, in the palace of a caliph or a mosque, with or without accomplices, in the desert or in the village, in a large or small city, etc., making people fear that they'll be killed or have their money taken or be raped. By the way, he's one of the first scholars to include rape into this definition. And when he was asked why, he said, taking the dignity away from a woman is worse than taking her money. That was his response. He said, when any person commits this crime and causes terror, fear among the population, he is therefore liable to the punishment. The Maliki jurist, Ibn al-Bar, defined the agent of hiraba as, or the terrorist, as anyone who disturbs free passage in the streets. Closer to the microphone. No one can hear me. That is very discouraging. So, I have been talking randomly. Nobody can hear anything I say. Okay, well, thank you. Anyone who disturbs free passage in this, I'm afraid I'm going to blow your ears out. That's why I'm not doing it close. By taking money, killing people, or violating what God has made unlawful to violate, is guilty of hiraba, be he a Muslim or a non-Muslim, free or slave, and whether he actually realizes his goal of taking money or killing or not. So even if he's a terrorist who doesn't know what he's doing, he's still guilty of that crime. Many contemporary scholars echo this view. However, if Islam is very clear about limitations, and very clear about what terrorism is, okay, that you cannot cause terrorism, you can't hurt innocent people, you can't cause discord and corruption within society, why is it that there are so many Muslims, I won't say so many, but a sizable minority that is suggesting otherwise? Well, let me give you the poster boy for these individuals, the late Osama bin Laden. After the attacks of 9/11 on October 21st, he had an interview with Al Jazeera where he said this: they, the ulama, say that the killing of innocents is wrong and invalid, and for proof, they say that the Prophet ﷺ forbade the killing of children and women, and this is true. He admits this is true. We can't kill women and children. We can't kill innocent people. Osama bin Laden is saying this. Okay? He goes on though. It is valid and has been laid down by the Prophet ﷺ in an authentic tradition. But this forbidding of killing children and innocents is not absolute. Let me repeat that, and I will continue with this quote. Osama bin Laden said that this prohibition is not absolute. He goes on. If the disbelievers were to kill our children and women, then we should not feel ashamed to do the same to them. Mainly to deter them from trying to kill our children and women again. The scholars and the people of knowledge, such as Al-Qurtubi, in his tafsir, say that if the disbelievers were to kill our women and children, then we should not feel ashamed to do the same. This is Osama bin Laden saying that this is not set in stone. This is not, you can violate this rule. This is Osama bin Laden saying this. And he tries to quote Imam Qurtubi. Now this is interesting that he actually references Imam Qurtubi because his tafsir doesn't actually say that. It says the complete opposite, which shows you how ignorant Osama bin Laden actually was. This is what Imam Qurtubi actually said, and I quote in his tafsir. It is not permissible for us to retaliate in the same manner, even if they kill our women and children and cause sorrow to befall us. It is not permissible for us to act likewise with the intention of making them feel grief and sorrow and terror. The very people he's referencing contradict him. But why did Osama bin Laden say this? Did he have any scriptural support other than these scholars that he thinks supported him? He thinks he does. Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda and all these other groups who follow them, okay, they use particularly two ayahs in the Quran to back their justification for killing civilians in the West. The first of them is in Surah Al-Baqarah 194. Fighting in the sacred month is for aggression committed in the sacred month, and for all violations is legal retribution. So whoever has assaulted you, then assault him in the same way that he has assaulted you. Okay? This is the first one. So they're saying, if the enemy has attacked you a certain way, you can attack them in the same way. All right? The next one, 16:126. And if you punish an enemy, punish with an equivalent of that which you have been harmed. These are the two main passages they refer to in order to attack civilians in the West, okay, or in anywhere else where they feel disenfranchised. However, there is a major problem with their understanding of these two ayahs. It's a major problem. And for that, since I think we have some time, I'm going to need some volunteers to help me. So if 4 young gentlemen would like to walk up to the stage right now, that'd be greatly appreciated. Please. I would like to show you how this logic doesn't make any sense, and at the same time, I need 2 more people, please. 2 more brothers. Don't be shy. I'm not going to hurt you much. I need 2 more people, please. I have to have 2 or this lecture will not continue. Okay, 1 more. Oh, actually, over here is fine. Today you're going to be actors. And if you do well enough, you might get a nomination. 1 more, great. Lovely. Okay, first off, yes. Beautiful brothers. Alhamdulillah. First off, the refutation. Fight in the way of Allah those who fight you, but do not transgress limits. Indeed, Allah does not like transgressors. Here's where I don't have to give you this much to show you how ridiculous this interpretation is. I'll show you right now. Okay, I'm going to give you a story. Can I use this one? Oh, that's great. It's like I'm on a game show. Okay, so we're going to have person A and person B and their families. Okay, so this is going to be a small story to represent the contemporary world. So you're going to be Mr. West. Okay, not Kanye West, Mr. West. Okay, you don't want to be him anyway. And you're going to be his family. Okay, so you're going to stand behind him, not all the way, but just enough. Not his wife, his brother. You're going to be Mr. East. Okay, and you're going to be his family. All right. Now, one day, Mr. West decides he's feeling particularly superior that day, and he wants to make Mr. East eat the same food as him. This is a very basic example, okay? So you want to make sure that Mr. East only eats McDonald's for the rest of his life, all right? Now, Mr. East, you love biryani, okay? And you are not going to allow somebody to come over and make you eat McDonald's. Right? Now, you decide that you have some weapons, and you don't like Mr. East anymore, and you're going to kill Mr. East. Okay? No body slamming, please. And no throwing over. Okay? So, Mr. East, if you kill him directly, it'll cause some problems. So, you're going to kill his family instead. Okay? So just shoot him or something, boom, okay? Now you're going to be dead. Please sit down. Okay? Now, you've killed his family. Now, Mr. East is very angry. Okay? Mr. East is very angry. You killed my family. And as far as I'm concerned, the Quran says that if you do something to me, I can do the same to you. So instead of killing Mr. West, he kills his family. Wow. With that, he's going to get one faster than Leonardo DiCaprio. So, okay, so first question to the audience. This is an interactive session. First question to the audience. Did Mr. West and Mr. East, did their families do anything wrong? No. They did nothing wrong. Okay, good. Now, who was the aggressor in this? Mr. West. Right. Now, who was the retaliator? Mr. East. All right then. Now here's the problem. Not only did the families not do anything, but the aggressors have not been punished. How have they not been punished? Because the people who were aggressed against were not them. It was their families. You understand the logic here? They are only partially victims. The main victims were their families. So the people who should technically be retaliating are their families, not them. Does that make sense? Are you following the logic yet? Okay, I'll make it more clear for you. When he was attacked, all right, it was not him that was attacked. It was his family. Okay? So if he is going to retaliate on behalf of his family, he needs to hit the aggressor that attacked his family, which should be him, not him. Does that make sense? The families were not the aggressors in any situation, so they have no right to be punished. This is why this logic does not work, because the people who are using these ayahs are confusing who the punisher is and who the punished is. They're actually being very egotistical, because they're saying, I was punished because my family was killed. That is the most egotistical thing you could say. It is not you who was punished, it was your family. Your family is dead, not you. You are suffering as a result of that, but you were not the victim. Your family was the victim. They have a right upon the aggressor for him to be killed as a result of that, not his family. When this man, not saying you're going to do it, but when this man kills his family, he has become exactly like his enemy. You understand? That is what do not transgress limits means. When your tafsir of the Quran is your enemy, you have no limits. You have zero limits. The manhaj of these people who claim to be on the Sunnah, who claim to be following the Quran, their manhaj is kufr. And you may live again. Okay. Thank you for the lovely demonstration, gentlemen. And please. Do we have any time? We have 10 more minutes. No, actually, I think I've wasted it. No, so I wanted to make that point. We don't have any time left, so we're going to have to reserve the rest for the next session. And that's actually pretty good because I have a lot more information here. But I hope that you all understand this point. And to close this part off, I want to mention once again that just because the enemy has done something to you, even if they've done it to you, our religion is very explicit about the limitations and about the boundaries in which we are allowed to fight them back. Because once again, if we define our reaction based on our enemy's behavior, we are not following our religion, we're following theirs. Does that make sense? This is why this ayah cannot be interpreted in such an expansive manner, because by the time that we have interpreted in this manner, if we continue to interpret it in this manner, we are leaving our religion and joining the enemies. We're becoming exactly what we are fighting. And this is just one of the major proofs as to how these people are completely ignorant. I did not even have to provide much to you. I just had to show you the logic of what eye for an eye actually means. I just had to show you that these people were victims. They were not the perpetrators. That's all I had to show you. And that simple understanding that you easily grasp cannot be grasped by these so-called muhajideen. They can't even the basic logic. It does not even touch their brain. So, thank you very much for that demonstration. Inshallah, the next session I think will be more revealing. We just went through some basics. But I will be exploring the ideology that actually makes them want to do these things. And I've already given you a hint. But I'm going to be a little bit more detailed in the next session. And I'll be discussing contemporary events such as the Syrian Revolution, including the rise of ISIS in the past 3 years. So that'll be more exciting for you guys. And Jazakallah khaira, please take a break, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I hear that the audio is bothering people, so I'm going to try to speak louder and more clearly into the microphone. I apologize for those who have not been able to hear. Inshallah, you still have benefited from the last session. However, this part of the session I think will be even more beneficial because this is where I'm going to reveal to you the ideology that actually perpetuates or motivates terrorism. And first, I want to give you an idea of how the West views Islam. I think you all know this already, especially from the video that you just saw. Islam is seen as a violent religion that wants to impose itself onto the rest of the world. Okay? Now, we all know this is absurd. This is a ridiculous belief. However, it is taken very seriously in the West, and especially Western media. In fact, the notion is that terrorism is caused by religiously devout individuals, people who are too Islamic. That is why terrorists exist, because they are being too Islamic. They are following the Prophet ﷺ too much. They are following the Quran too much. That is why they are committing terrorism. That is what is being told to us, and that is what is motivating the policies in the West against the Muslim world. However, there have been some recent studies by Western researchers who are now starting to wake up and realize that there is something wrong with this narrative. All of these individuals that I'm about to name, all of these organizations that I'm about to name, are not Muslim. Yet for the past few years, they have been studying the data, they have been interviewing all these terrorists, they have been looking into their lives, and they've realized a very common thread that goes through all of them. And this may startle you, but I think that you need to know. The most recent study in 2015 by Professor Harun Kunnani, who is an atheist, former Hindu, studying in the United States, he wrote a paper called In a Decade Lost, and he states therein, and I quote, "The factors which lead someone to commit acts of terrorism are complex and cannot be reduced to holding a set of values deemed to be radical. There is little evidence to support the view that there is a single cause to terrorism." And this is after he had researched all the contemporary research on terrorism. He says that there is no evidence whatsoever that individuals who become more devout to Islam perpetuate violence and terrorism. There is no evidence. John Horgan, an expert on terrorism and radicalization at Pennsylvania State University, United States, says that the idea that radicalization causes terrorism is perhaps the greatest myth alive today in terrorism research. First, it has been proven that the overwhelming majority of people who hold radical beliefs do not engage in violence. What does he mean by radical beliefs? He defines them. If you want a khilafah, okay? If you want to implement Sharia, if you want to implement, even the dhimmi laws from the Ottoman Empire, these individuals are the least likely to commit acts of terrorism. Interesting. He goes on to say, secondly, there is increasing evidence that people who engage in terrorism don't hold radical beliefs. They are more secular. They are far more secular. Mark Sageman, another radicalization and terrorism expert, suggests that government should stop being brainwashed by this notion that radicalization causes terrorism. MI5, the equivalent of the CIA in Britain, I'm sure all of you have heard of MI5, okay, states that all of the people they've investigated on charges of terrorism, this is about 200 or 300 or so, were religious novices. Religious novices. What does that mean? They lack religious literacy and they do not practice their faith. These are kuffar talking about so-called Muslim terrorists. They say they don't practice their religion. Moving on. Arizona State University, 2015 as well, or is it 2014? They examined over 2,000 texts of so-called Islamic extremists. So basically fatwa and letters and things like this from Osama bin Laden, Al-Qaeda, and all these groups they were sending back and forth to each other. They sometimes would put Quran and Hadith, of course, in their letters to encourage each other, okay? They found that 99% of all the ayahs that were quoted from the Quran, okay, only reference self-defense and humiliation. None of them were about aggressive warfare. None. All of it was about self-defense. They felt like they were being attacked, and alienation. Okay? So it's not because the religion tells them to go on jihad and kill people. It's just because they felt like they were defending themselves. That was their main reason to include certain ayahs in the Quran. Recent studies even reveal that a sizable portion of some of the foreign fighters who join ISIS, who come from Britain and Sweden and other places, okay, they like to shop on Amazon.com. All right? Because, before you go on jihad, you want to do some reading. And they found that the majority of text that they purchased was not the Quran and the collections of a hadith. Okay? The majority of books that they purchased, and I kid you not, this is from several people, was Islam for Dummies and the Quran for Dummies. Wallahi. I'm not joking. Okay? Now, if you don't believe me, here are some recent examples of these so-called Islamic extremists. All right? Let me give you some examples. Saifuddin Rezvou, okay, the recent ISIS shooter on the Tunisian beach that killed 38 people with an AK-47. Anyone remember that? That was in 2015. Okay, very recent. He went on Tunisian beach. He held an AK-47 in his umbrella. He went in the water. He waited when nobody was paying any attention. Took it out. Just started shooting everyone on the beach. He killed 38 people until he was gunned down. Okay. When they did an autopsy on him. Oh, by the way, ISIS took credit for the attack. When they did an autopsy on him, they found out he was drugged on cocaine. He was high on cocaine, and he was a cocaine drug dealer. That's just one. I have several more. Two of the Paris attackers, the recent Paris attack that killed 130 people, 4 weeks prior to the attack, two of the brothers who were involved in the attack, the major actors in this attack, the suicide bombers, they sold their bar, their pub, before they committed the attacks. They sold their pub. They were selling alcohol and narcotics before they decided to kill these people. Does that sound like a devout Muslim to you? Let me continue. The Charlie Hebdo attackers, people who went to Charlie Hebdo and killed the French, cartoonist, okay? They frequently smoked marijuana, hashish, and were involved in petty crimes and drug trafficking. So were the Boston Marathon bombers. Okay? We can do this all day. We go all the way back to the 9/11 attackers. Whether you regard that as being conspiracy or not, I'm not going to get into that. We can do that in the Q&A if you wish. But for right now, the individuals that we're talking about who were accused, okay, several of them were found in the strip club a week before the attacks, drinking alcohol and snorting cocaine. These are the people who want to be like the Sahaba. The Prophet Muhammad said, these are the people bringing back the Khilafah. They're drug dealers. And people who don't practice their faith at all. Many of the 9/11 attackers, they found that before they killed themselves, they found several of their notes in their private dormitories and things, where they had made deals with Al-Qaeda and others, offering them large sums of money to pay off their debts and the family debts. And they say that that was their main motivation. It wasn't because they felt, oh, now I'm all pious and now I'm going to fly, slam a plane into a building. It's because they were being paid off. Now, if we are to show that the majority of these terrorist attacks are being perpetuated or being conducted by people who are not even practicing, is there any other evidence that we can show that being a devout Muslim doesn't make you a terrorist? In fact, there is. It's quite a bit. I'm going to give you two studies because these are the most important ones that have been released in the past year. Okay? The first one is by Professor Stephen Fish from UC Berkeley, United States. All right? He studied the murder rates in Muslim-majority societies for the past 20 to 30 years. He found the following, and I quote, "Predominantly, Muslim countries only average 2.4 murders per annum per 100,000 people," meaning there's 2.5 murders for every 100,000 people in a Muslim society, okay? All Muslim societies. However, in non-Muslim countries, it's 7.5 to every 100,000. That's triple the amount of murder rates in non-Muslim countries. When he was contradicted, when they said, well, the reason that's because Muslim countries are very oppressive, he said, no, I did the controls for that too. It doesn't count. He said, I did the controls for that. He says, I found that controlling for political regime in my statistical analysis did not change the findings. More Muslims equals less homicide. More Muslims equals less homicide. The more Muslims there are in a society, the less people get murdered. That is now a fact. It is now a fact. And you know, it's common sense, actually. And let me give you one anecdote. Malaysia. Who here fears for their life when they walk outside at night in Malaysia? At 2 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock, some of the brothers, you're walking around eating Arab food. Do you feel like you're going to get attacked? Do you feel any sort, if you're in Dubai, for instance, do you feel like you're going to get attacked or assaulted? Saudi Arabia, do you feel like you're going to get attacked or assaulted? Let me tell you about Chicago, where I grew up. Last year, 500 people were murdered by guns alone. 500. You don't even hear about 5 murders in Malaysia. 500 people in one city in the United States were killed by gun violence alone. That's not counting other weapons or domestic violence. That's just murders by guns. 500 people in one city in the United States. That's more than most of the Muslim countries combined. And then they call us violent. You can't walk in Chicago at 2 o'clock in the morning. You will die. I promise you, you will die. Or you will be mugged. And if you're a woman, you will be raped. That is not a joke. You walk in certain places in Chicago at 2 o'clock in the morning, you will not come back. Okay? Everyone there owns a gun, and at least 2 people per day die in Chicago from gang-related violence. And some of them are minors. I'm talking 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds being shot. Okay? This is not a joke. This happens all the time in the United States. I carry a gun in the United States to protect myself. I'm not joking. I have a gun, not with me right now, but in the US, I have a firearm. I carry it under my clothes. Especially with Trump supporters now, with all these white supremacists, I have to carry a gun, even more. Okay? It's no joke. And the sisters, the Muslim sisters in the United States, are more likely to be attacked than the brothers. I've heard of so many cases where a Muslim sister walking down the street in the middle of the day, and a man will walk up and rip her hijab off and start kicking and punching her. That is not a joke. There are places in the US that are perfectly safe. If you've been there, you know. But not all places are safe. There are places in the US that even the police will not go to. Okay? Another study recently released in 2016. These studies are starting to come out because people are starting to realize the nature of secular liberal societies, all right? The sister's name is Saba Mahmoud. She wrote about Egyptian minorities in her research called Religious Difference in a Secular Age. Okay, this is the name of the research. What she found was that the more secular that Egypt became, the more violent people were against religious minorities. You hear that? The more secular a nation became, the more likely the Christians and the Baha'is and the other minorities were attacked or killed or their buildings were destroyed. She tried to judge this based on the standards of the Ottoman Empire. She found that less religious persecution occurred against minorities during the Ottoman Empire than it does today. How is this significant? Because everyone is saying that if you have a religious government, or a Muslim government, or an Islamic government, a real khilafah ruling over the Muslims, all of a sudden, everyone's going to die. All the religious minorities are going to be killed, and we're going to persecute everyone. But this historically is not the case. And research is now finding that secular regimes are the cause of more religious persecution than even the Ottoman Empire was capable of. I'll give you another example. This is even more important example. What happened to Turkey? Do we have any Turkish individuals in the audience? I'm sure you know your history very well. What happened during the Ottoman reforms? Who took power? They were called the Young Turks. Anybody refer? Do they know who the Young Turks were? Okay. They were a secular nationalist group. They wanted to do away with the Ottoman Empire. Does anybody know about the Armenian genocide? Some people dispute it, but there was a significant number of people who were killed during that time. Do you know who perpetuated the Armenian genocide? It was not the Ottoman Empire. It was the Young Turks. The Young Turks were the ones who started the genocide. It was not the Ottoman Empire. But if you go into history books, they say during this time period, it was the Ottoman Empire that killed the Armenians. But they were not the ones in power. It was the Young Turks who were in power. This is very simple. You can go to Wikipedia right now, look it up on your phone. The Young Turks were in power during the Armenian genocide. Not the Sultan. It was the secular nationalists. They were the ones killing everyone, not the Muslims. These are historical facts. This is not disputable. So what ideology then fuels this? I'm walking around now, sorry. I'm getting worked up, that's why. Okay, now I'm getting really passionate. You're going to see me get angry. Yes? Good, okay. So what sort of ideology is fueling this? Well, the easy answer is secular liberalism. And why is this the case? Well, we hear in the Western media that the more secular you are, the more peaceful you are, the less violent you are. Of course, common sense states otherwise. I showed you these studies, but not only that, but look at Western foreign policy. How many Muslim nations are invading everyone else and bombing them into oblivion? Almost zero. How many Western countries are invading other countries and bombing them into oblivion? Almost all of them. Okay? How many Muslim countries have been invaded in the past 20 years? 15. How many coups, military coups, meaning that they tried to install a dictator and destroy the society from within? It's happened almost, I think it's less than 30, but almost near there. Okay? Who can tell me, who is more oppressive? Morsi or Sisi? Thank you. Who has killed more people, the Muslim Brotherhood or Sisi? Who shut down Al-Azhar? Morsi or Sisi? Any more questions? The more secular government is, especially within the Muslim world, the more violent it becomes, the more likely it is to invade its neighbors. Why is this the case? Very simple. It's the ideology behind secular liberalism. And I'm going to actually touch on this briefly because this is not actually what the lecture is about, but I have to give you some background. What is secular liberalism? Okay, well, first off, they'll tell you it's religion does not rule over the government. That's the first thing they'll say. Separation of church and state. But they say something else. They say individual liberties, freedom, freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of whatever else you can conceive of. Freedom, freedom, freedom. But these are not values. The liberal West, the secular liberal West, defines itself in opposition to what it does not want to be. What I mean by that is this. Secular liberalism was created, not in a vacuum, but in opposition to monarchy supported by a religious state. Okay? They wanted freedom from that, mostly for economic reasons. Now, what occurred during this time, it's only about 200 or 300 years ago, was that they started to define themselves in contrast, in opposition to their enemies. So they said, we are free. Free from what? From you. We have freedom of speech. As opposed to what? As opposed to you. We have freedom of thought, as opposed to what? As opposed to you. You understand? We are free from you. That's what liberalism defines itself as. We are liberal from you. Okay, the reason that the United States and Europe can say we are free is because they keep comparing themselves to other societies. So, for instance, the new flavor of enemy of the day are Muslims. So when the secular liberal West defines itself as being free, they're saying we are free compared to you, Muslims. And what it does, it creates an extreme picture of its enemies. So the liberal West will define Muslims as being overly violent, right? Suppressive of women, suppressive of speech, suppressive of thought, okay? As being less. That is how they define themselves. Without us, the liberal West would not know who it is. They would not know themselves because they need an enemy in order to know who they are. That's why they have an identity crisis. That's why when you hear things like British values and American values, they can't tell you what they are. They just tell you that we're not like you. It's exactly what they do every time. They say, what is secular values? What is British values? They say, well, it's not Afghanistan. Well, it's not, Pakistan. It's not Saudi Arabia. That's what they'll say. Our women can drive. Things like this. Except Saudi Arabia now has the largest women's university in the world, by the way. But feminists won't tell you that. So what it does, it creates a projection of itself, what it does not want to be, onto its enemies. And then it makes an excuse to destroy them and to impose itself onto them. That's why you have universal human rights. They're not universal, by the way. They're Western. When they say human rights, they mean our rights for you. And if you don't like them, we're going to bomb you. That is the truth. That is exactly what they do. Gaddafi, when he was bombed by NATO forces in Libya, which, by the way, is the reason that ISIS now controls 70% of Libya, because NATO decided to bomb him and destroy him and take him out of power. Right? The reason that Gaddafi was bombed was not because he killed 40,000 people, as they say, because they don't really care. If they cared, they would have bombed Syria a long time ago. Okay? They didn't do that. Right? They bombed him because he wanted to change the currency. That's a long story as well. But Gaddafi, when he was bombed, they said that we need to bring human rights to your people because they need them. They have lost their rights under you. But they didn't agree to that. They never said, please come here and bomb us and give us our human rights. The West imposed itself, saying that you need them because you are too stupid and you are too ignorant and you are too below us to understand that you need our way of life. That is basically the reasons why they did what they did, and they continue to do what they do. Because they believe we are inferior and that we need their freedom, which is why they're willing to kill half of our populations to give it to us. So in this way, when a Muslim is being imposed by these standards, when a Muslim, even living in a liberal society, what's going to happen to them? When they're constantly being told that they are this thing, even if they're the most liberal person, there's only two options for them. One, they become apostates because they can't handle the pressure. That's why, if you look at liberal societies, especially Muslim societies that are becoming more liberal, rates of apostasy go up dramatically. The more liberal society becomes, the more likely Muslims are to apostate. Okay? The apostasy rates are now raising in Malaysia, so that may give you a clue as to what's going on with your politics. Just a hint. Bangladesh, apostasy rates are skyrocketing. What happens when a Muslim is experiencing this in a liberal society, he's told to do one of two things. Either become less Muslim or not Muslim at all, to the point where he becomes a liberal, or he wants to reform Islam, okay? Or he becomes the projection that the West tells him that he is. You understand? He becomes exactly the image that the West wants him to be, because he doesn't know anything else. That is why a lot of these young boys, men, are joining ISIS, coming from cocaine addictions, and then jumping straight into devotion to Allah, because they're not actually devout. They are simply fulfilling what the West is projecting for them. They're doing exactly, they are liberals. These young men who are joining ISIS, not only do they not practice, but they are liberals because they're fulfilling the identity of the West by becoming its greatest enemy. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay? Now, what has this created in the Muslim world? It has created the rise of two extremes. And this is where we're going to get even more interested. Now we're going to talk about contemporary events, the Syrian Revolution and the rise of ISIS. The Murji'a, or the Reformers, as they like to call themselves now, have become a majority within many of these societies as nationalists, okay, as non-practicing Muslims. And they're counter-opposite because these are the two greatest enemies among the what do you call the heretics within Islam. And they have also created the Khawarij, okay? They have created the most extreme version of, or interpretation of Islam that has existed within our history. So before getting to the Khawarij, I want to speak about these reformers, and I want to talk about the Syrian conflict, and I want to make a disclaimer. I apologize beforehand about what I'm going to say, okay? Because I know there's a lot of passionate individuals. A lot of passionate individuals. Can you hear me now? Okay. There's a lot of passionate individuals in here, especially Syrians, who want Assad out of power, okay? I want him out of power too. I want you to understand that before I say anything, all right? But I want to give you a brief look at what happened first. In 2011, when the unrest began, the protest, and Assad was going around killing and hundreds of people, etc. At the end of that year, 10,000 people were killed. Not just civilians, but also soldiers. 10,000, okay? When the revolution went into full swing, what I mean is when the rebels finally came together and started to fight back in a military fashion, okay? That number rose dramatically. Now you have 500,000 people are dead to this day, and it is rising. Assad is still in power. More groups have entered Syria. More groups have taken power in Syria. ISIS has taken almost half of Syria. I need to ask you a serious question for those of you who are still backing this revolution. Was it worth it? I know that's a very hard question that I've given you, but I'm asking you again. 500,000 people are dead. In 2011, it was 10,000. 500,000 are dead and still rising. Assad is still in power. He's gaining land again. He's fighting back. Okay, he's not going to lose it anytime soon. All right? Hezbollah is now inside. ISIS is inside. Al-Nusra Front is inside. You have various factions within the Syrian rebel groups that are fighting each other and killing each other. More civilians are leaving. Refugees are constantly being poured into Europe now. People are losing their homes, their lives. Was it worth it? That is a question I think that we need to seriously ask ourselves. And I want to be blunt here as well. I do not support Assad at all. However, I support our traditional scholars in respect to rebelling, in respect to their understanding of rebellion. Thank you very much. Is this 10 more minutes? Wow. It's not much time, actually. I hope we can extend it a little bit because there's a lot more to say. So 10,000 people were killed in 2011, 50,000 in 2012, 100,000 by 2013. Now in between 250 to 500,000, I'd say it's 500,000. Many of the FSA, the Free Syrian Army, have defected and gone to ISIS. Many of them have defected and gone to ISIS. Now Saudi Arabia is getting involved. Russia has already been involved. They said they're leaving, but they're not. They're still there. The United States is involved. Every country, this is World War III. Everyone is involved because we want to get rid of one guy. Now, am I saying he was right? He's a good person? No, he's horrible. He deserves death for what he has done. He deserves it. But our scholars were they're very wise about this. They said that it's legitimate to take out a ruler if he's, for instance, he's a kafir, or if he's unjust to his people. It's legitimate. However, they said that there are limitations to that as well. For instance, and this is the most important point, they quote this hadith, they mention this hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ said, a Muslim must not humiliate himself. It was asked of him, how does a Muslim humiliate himself? And the Prophet ﷺ responded and said, by exposing himself to an affliction that he is not able to bear. The Prophet ﷺ responded and said, by exposing himself to an affliction that he cannot bear. Meaning, if you let your passions run, and you know you're going up against a superior force, and you know by doing so, you're going to destroy your entire society and everyone in it. Is this the wisest decision to make? Remember, 10,000 people, that's horrible. 10,000 people died in 2011. It is 500,000. 500,000. You can't even comprehend that many people dead. And the amount of refugees, millions. Millions. How can you comprehend that?